So there's two sources. One, I have a colleague who is supposed to record this. I got a message that his Mac is not working, which is not great timing. But there is supposed to be a recording, and you can see that there's a recording. I don't know if you can see this. I'm the host, so I can see that we're already recording. Anyway, it's 8:05. Welcome, John Whyte. Welcome, Jonathan Goldstein. Welcome, Avi Yaron. Kevin Tracey, Jeremy Sohn will be here shortly. You are all joining the health data and healthcare transformation session. We're going to move very quickly, 15-minute presentations generally. Really no Q&A. The first presentation, Dr. Kevin Tracey from Northwell Health, will be talking about the bioelectronic future. Just say no to drugs. Dr. Tracey, the floor is yours, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll share my screen if that's, tell me when you can see my slides.
Perfect.
As slides, do you see now, do you still see them?
Yes.
Great. So thank you very much, Olivia. It's really great to be here. What I'd like to do is hopefully provoke some consideration that we have been making drugs to treat diseases the same way for more than 100 years. And the way to do that is by identifying a molecular mechanism of the disease, screening libraries against the target, the molecular mechanism, and then producing those molecules for testing in safety and efficacy and selling them. And what I'd like to have you take away from the next few minutes of my talk is the idea that it's now possible to build electronic devices, bioelectronic devices, to replace drugs. And the process begins in the same starting place, which is choosing a disease and choosing a drug target. But then rather than screening libraries for molecules to hit the target, it's possible to map neural circuits to the target in vivo. And by hacking into those neural circuits, use neural signals to control the target in vivo. Using those inputs, those mechanisms as design specifications, it's now possible to construct devices to control the nerve, to control the target. And that's the basis of bioelectronic medicine. And I'll show you some examples of how that works and leave you with the idea that there's big opportunity here for the future. And I think it's a future that will disrupt some industries and offer significant hope for millions of patients. So this story for me personally really began as a story of understanding the molecular mechanisms of inflammation. And you know, I've had an opportunity recently to re-review some of the statistics, and I urge you to do it on your own time sometime. But even with COVID factored in as a blip on the radar screen of worldwide mortality, these diseases caused by inflammation dominate the risk of morbidity and mortality for humans on the planet Earth today. Inflammation has been implicated in the pathogenesis of cancer, heart disease, stroke, respiratory diseases, neurodegeneration, diabetes, dementia, hypertension, and other autoimmune and autoinflammatory diseases. And understanding mechanisms to control inflammation has tremendous opportunity to benefit future patients with these conditions and other inflammatory conditions not shown here. Now, my own foray into this space started in the 1990s, looking at this molecule, which we named CNI 1493 after we developed it in my lab, and it's since been officially named cemapimod. This molecule, we won't talk about the chemistry or the mechanism today, other than to say this molecule is a very good anti-inflammatory agent in animal models. We published dozens and dozens of papers showing that this molecule blocks the immune system from producing inflammatory molecules like TNF and IL-1, and that by blocking those cytokines in animal models, this molecule is a powerful anti-inflammatory. We actually developed this model for clinical trials in inflammatory bowel disease and in cancer patients being treated with IL-2, and it was effective. During the course of all of this work, however, we had a complete surprise. We were studying this molecule in animals with cerebral ischemia, with a stroke. And we decided to put the molecule directly into the brain of mice and rats in order to turn off the cytokine production in the brain. And turning off the cytokines, we reasoned, would make the stroke smaller. And it did do that. And we were very pleased at first because the molecule in the brain effectively turned off the TNF production in the brain. But it also turned off the TNF production in the lungs, the liver, the spleen, the intestines, the kidneys. In other words, a small amount of this molecule in the brain of these animals turned off inflammation throughout the entire body. And this made no sense whatsoever. This was a huge surprise. Months and months we wondered how could this possibly be? What could be going on in the brain that would turn off the immune system from making TNF in the body? And so we did the following experiment. We put the drug in the brain again, but we cut the vagus nerve, reasoning that the signals were traveling down the vagus nerve. The drug did something in the brain and turned on the vagus nerve was the idea. And maybe the vagus nerve signals were turning off and controlling the inflammation in the body. And when we cut the vagus nerve, we saw that TNF production in the body was not blocked. So we had essentially proved that signals in the vagus nerve were controlling the ability of the body to mount an inflammatory response. And so in the late 1990s, we wrote a series of patents and papers that outlined the possibility of putting an electronic chip stimulating the vagus nerve to turn off inflammation in the body. And you know, we studied these mechanisms, and it's just important to review a couple of fundamental points about the vagus nerve. First, it's a principal conduit connecting the brainstem to the organs of the body. It does this in a way that establishes reflexes that control how organs work, how the heart works, how the gut works, how the liver works. What was not on the list, frankly, when we came along into this field was the immune system was not on the list. People hadn't considered that the vagus nerve would control the immune response. The other thing you have to keep in mind about the vagus nerve is it's very complicated. It's not a solid copper wire. It's more like 100,000 copper wires. It's like a transatlantic cable that carries millions of bits of information every second. Most of the information in the vagus nerve is actually sensory. It's actually a way that the brain knows what's happening in the liver and the gut and the heart. Most of the information is going up, but 20,000 fibers, 20% of the fibers travel from the brainstem down to the organs to complete reflex arcs that balance physiological homeostasis. So we began studying this and found over 20 years that the signals actually travel into the spleen. The electrical signals are converted to a chemical signal called norepinephrine. The norepinephrine controls a lymphocyte, a T cell that we name T-chat because it makes acetylcholine, and the acetylcholine interacts with macrophages to turn off the production of cytokines. So that little video clip summarized 20 years of work, millions of dollars of expense by hundreds of people, all of it replicated by laboratories around the world as the basis of the idea that if you map these mechanisms in a neural circuit format with neuroscience and molecular understanding, it should be possible to build devices to target those pathways in diseases where there's too much TNF being made, like rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory bowel disease, which are two indications for which anti-TNF antibodies are clinically approved. So I envision having a small device implanted on the vagus nerve that would send signals down into the immune system, switching off the inflammation in the body through these pathways that we had identified. In order to do these clinical trials, I founded a company called Setpoint Medical, which did the first clinical trials of this idea beginning in 2011. And the first trials were done in patients with severe rheumatoid arthritis. And this is a devastating inflammatory disease because because the inflammation erodes the bone and destroys the bone and cartilage. And these patients get these nodules of inflammation, which are almost like tumors. And blocking TNF can shrink these nodules. And blocking inflammation shrinks these nodules. And so in this first trial, the device that was an off-the-shelf device made by Cyberonics, which is a inserted under the clavicle with a lead that goes up to the vagus nerve in the neck. And this device is actually been implanted in 150,000 or more epilepsy patients. And we reprogram the device, SetPoint reprogram the device so that it only fires for about 5 minutes a day, 2 or 3 times a day, as opposed to firing continuously on and off 24 hours a day. And the reason, we could talk about it in the Q&A, but the reason for this short duty cycle is that the half-life, the duration of the anti-inflammatory effect is 24 to 48 hours. The first experiment was done here at Northwell at the Feinstein Institutes by a neurosurgeon, Ash Mehta. And you can see here, these are patients who are getting implanted before anesthesia, they're making TNF. After anesthesia, with the device implanted, they're still making TNF because the device hasn't been turned on. And then once the electricity is flowing through the vagus nerve, the TNF production is diminished. And we call this system the inflammatory reflex of the vagus nerve. And this proves for the first time that it's possible to hack into it in humans. The clinical effect was striking. This study was done by Frida Koopman in Amsterdam with Paul Peter Tack as her thesis advisor. You can see that in cohorts 1 were patients who had failed methotrexate and steroids, cohort 2 had failed biologics, and cohort 3 is actually combined. You can see that when the device is turned on, their clinical score improves in a highly significant way. And when the device was turned off, they got worse because there's no electricity flowing during this period. When the device was turned back on, the patients improved again. And their TNF levels in these studies track the clinical response. This is the first patient. He was treated on Labor Day in 2011. And he was in the mountains of Western Bosnia in Mostar. And I went to meet him. And he's the patient. That's his physician. That's the chairman of the department. And this is the electrophysiology technician in the hospital. And you can tell that I look much happier than the patient in this particular picture, but the patient was actually very happy too. He had gone from being homebound and unable to get off the couch because of rheumatoid arthritis pain. And this was now 9 years ago. He's back to driving a truck and playing tennis and other sports with his children. He's in remission from a disease that had disabled him for 10 years. This is Kelly. She had Crohn's disease for 15 years. It came on when she was about 18 years old. And she was in and out of wheelchairs with manifestations of arthritis as well as complications of her bowel disease. More than 25 medications failed her. She was hospitalized 7 times, millions of dollars of expense. And this is an abridged list of the drugs that Kelly tried to take to block the inflammation in her situation. I got an email from Kelly, which the subject line was "Thank you for saving my life." And it's obviously a very special email that I've kept since. And this is Kelly today. She's now 3 years status post the implant. She takes no drugs. I know she looks like this because she's right down the hall from me right now. We hired her. She is a patient advocate and director of our education and for patient services. She's collected, this slide is old, she's collected more than 1,500 patients into a database of other patients who want to participate in these kind of trials. And she's helping us recruit to several trials here for non-invasive vagus nerve stimulation. It's a very special story. She gave me her cane, and that sits in the corner of my office. This is really just the beginning. I just want to give you a sense of the kind of things I'm really excited about. Because what I've been showing you is an example of a scalable and replicable process to hack into the nervous system to build other devices for other diseases. On the scientific side, we're in an exponential growth of publications, looking now on a general search for neuroimmune. Is this tremendous uptick now. Already, there's been thousands of papers in this exponential growth phase because the scientific impact of this is very, very high. One thing I'm really excited about is using AI and machine learning to listen into the signals of the vagus nerve. I told you 80% of it is sensory. And recently, my colleagues and I, led by Theo Zanos here at the Feinstein Institutes for Bioelectronic Medicine, has shown in the PNAS paper that you can actually decode the clusters using naive Bayesian algorithms, and you can actually isolate clusters that are specifically responsive to a specific cytokine. So the yellow cluster kind of goes along and does whatever it wants. This is a recording from a cuff on the vagus nerve of a mouse. And when we gave the mouse IL-1, you can see these orange fibers start to fire. On the other hand, they don't change after you give TNF, but this new blue group comes out of nowhere and starts firing after TNF. So we're honing in on this, thinking that it should be possible to build recorders or sensors that monitor levels of inflammation in the body as an electronic signal rather than a serum signal. We're also really excited about understanding how the behavior is controlled. So if you think about high school or college physiology, and you learned that if you put an electrode in the brain of a mouse or a rat, you can stimulate it into a rage response or a fight or flight response. You can stimulate the brain and the rat will copulate or seek food or water. We wondered if there was a brainstem center that would turn off inflammation and control the behavior of the immune system. And we found it. It turns out it's the dorsal motor nucleus of the brainstem, which is one of the origins of the nerves in the vagus nerve that are the motor nerves. And so you can see here we used genetically engineered mice that have channel rhodopsins that are light sensitive proteins embedded into the cholinergic fibers. And this is the dorsal motor nucleus of a mouse brain, and the laser is shining on it. When you turn the light on, when you turn the laser on in those animals that have the channel rhodopsin sensitive fibers, the splenic nerve starts to fire, as I showed you in that movie. And in the controls that don't have the channel rhodopsin, the light doesn't do anything. This means we can start to think about brainstem specific approaches using deep brain stimulators to control specific behavior of the immune system in vivo. We followed patients now for several years, and the results are very impressive. So this is now 2 years out. These are the patients in the rheumatoid arthritis study I showed you before. They have a sustained response, like Kelly Owens has had a sustained response. And the devices are getting smaller and cooler. This device, which is now going into clinical trials by Setpoint, is about the size of your little fingernail, the size of the fish oil pill you took this morning, and it will be embedded into the neck on the vagus nerve. It has everything in that, the ASIC, the battery, it has an antenna and a lead all in one place. And this has gotten breakthrough status designation by the FDA, and the definitive clinical trials for first in man were successful last year. The hopefully approval-based trials will begin in the next couple of months in rheumatoid arthritis in the United States. And this is more long-term follow-up data from Crohn's disease. This is my lab. We always meet at the beach and we always have a party, and we're hiring for any young people who are looking for careers in bioelectronic medicine. I think it's the future, and I think we are not looking at a distant future when devices will replace drugs. I think it's present tense happening now, and it's tremendously important. And it's tremendously rewarding, not only for the idea of helping patients, but also for breaking through new understanding of science, physiology, and biology. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tracey. That was excellent. I feel like I just added a couple of points to my IQ, so I appreciate that. We're going to transition from bioelectronics into medical technologies. Jonathan Goldstein from Boston Scientific is talking about the perfect storm. So Jonathan, as you share your screen, good, I think we're ready to go.
Great. Can you hear me okay? I think you can hear me okay. Good afternoon to you guys. Good evening to those in Israel. I just wanted to start off by saying that was an amazing initial talk, and mine will be nothing of that quality, neither in terms of technical nor in terms of the experience of the speaker. But what I'll be doing is I'll actually be touching on one sphere that Dr. Tracey was talking about, and trying to look really, I'd say 10,000 kilometers up or whatever it is, to see where we're at in 2020. And what we just heard was a perfect example of that sort of thing, which is a unique area for us to be in, as we're seeing what I call, and you'll see in the next few minutes, the confluence, if you like, of technology revolutions, data revolutions, and medical technology revolutions. And these are very different things. And when they come together, which they've got their own paths, they've got their own methodologies, but when they come together, as you saw in the previous talk, and I think you'll see in a few of the future ones, we have amazing things that are going to happen to the world and to each of us. So that's really what I'm going to focus on in a very few minutes. I'm Jonathan Goldstein, based in Israel, running the corporate scouting team at Boston Scientific, working in both corporate R&D and venture to try and find the sort of top-end technologies at a company or at a technology level that could be relevant for Boston as we look into the next few years. So with that in mind, and given the time, I just really wanted to touch on the concept of the confluence, basically the confluence of revolutions. And we're talking about 3 different revolutions which have been happening in the world over a long time. Probably the oldest one, debatable, but let's call it the oldest one, is what we're going to call the clinical revolution or the medical revolution, where we, of course, take everything here for granted, but the pace of growth in the 20th century of things which we, of course, think we knew forever is quite unbelievable. And each line here, and again, this is Wikipedia, it's nothing special to Boston Scientific, but just basically using this as a typical example of amazing events, each of which have saved hundreds of thousands or millions of lives in the past decades. And we are looking here at things that happened, again, over 100 years ago. We then advance from there into 2000 to today, and we have to use a slightly smaller font. Each of these things are, again, at the cusp of what's going on in medicine. Human Genome Project, can that compare with anything else? Hard to say. You start talking about vaccines, and the new vaccines which have saved millions of lives, if not more. You start talking about transplants, and you'll see that happens a lot here over the past 10, 15 years. But each one of these is a world in itself when we're really just at the cusp of what's going on here. So on one side, we are far more advanced in terms of medical maturity than, of course, we were 50 years ago. But even then, we actually knew how to deal with a number of diseases and septic problems, etc. But where the world is going to go from here is hard to know, and we're certainly not at the end of the path. Then at the same time, we also have the other aspect, which basically is the perspective of the technology revolution, which I'm certainly not an expert in, but there are so many different aspects of it, and I'm so pleased that we're able to show both on these slides as well as in the example we just had before of bioelectronics, which really is a merger of amazing technological aspects and amazing medical aspects at the same time, that we see different forms of evolutions occurring, whether it is at the PC level, whether it is just at the growth of human knowledge, or whether it is effectively across different industrial revolutions. And again, each of these deserves a lecture, which I am not suitable to give, but at the same time, we don't have the time for that. But primarily, the idea of technological revolution well beyond simply the PC, but going from industrialization on one side, digitization on another, steel, oil, electricity, whatever it might be, in order to advance things, has really come to a fore in the past, I would say, tens of years, probably century. And the last particular revolution that I'd like to focus on then is the data revolution, which we all know about, and to a large extent is much more talked about now because it's more recent, I would say. And here we're talking about, in the most generous form, from 1960 on, probably from 1980 on to a large extent. Here I'm focusing here on one slide, focusing on the cloud and the development of the cloud. But there's so many other elements associated with the data revolution, some of which are really rather premature at the moment, or rather immature at the moment, particularly when it comes to clinical data that we'll talk about in a few moments. But primarily, we're talking here about a revolution in itself, not merely associated with technology, but technology enabled in order to allow data to be shared, to be collected, to be absorbed, to be measured, in ways that we couldn't have thought of 20 years ago or 30 years ago. The reason I'm putting these together today is because when we take all three of them together, the medical revolution, the data revolution, and the technology revolution, you end up basically with a mix there, which is probably the biggest challenge that you could look for. If you just look at the sort of work that is going on when you're connecting these things, you're coming across difficulties both in terms of getting the right questions to be asked, getting the right devices to be created, sizing them correctly, understanding what you're noting, sharing the data, communicating the data, analyzing the data, AI, machine learning, all these elements come together and you start thinking about big data, as the case may be, all with the purpose of allowing you to improve medical technology using the ability of today's data sets, whether it is electronic medical records, whether it is potentially the issue of how to integrate different data sets together, whether it's trying to do predictive analytics of different sorts. These are all areas, again, that deserve lectures on their own, again, by experts, not myself. But when you're meeting medical data and technology together, you are inevitably going to be meeting some major opportunities in the next decades. And that's coming in very soon. And that's my introduction for today. Boston Scientific, it's only a small player in the world of medical devices, very small player in the world of technology, minimal player in the world of data compared to so many other large institutions today, whether you go from the Googles and the Microsofts and back down from there. The world we are in is trying to give meaningful innovation to the world of the patient and the physician, to try and deal with minimally invasive solutions in many of the areas described over here. And I won't waste too much time on this slide, but you're welcome to look much of this up on the web on your own. What we have here, though, is a question that we've been asking ourselves for many years, is how do we take advantage of the technology revolution and the digital and the data revolution in order to improve the outcomes for our patients, improve the quality of our products, improve the nature of production, and improve what we learn about our patients by means of, as a result, improving our products in order to help the next generation of products and patients. And there are various different areas of where we can do that. We don't have enough time, and I also, again, don't have enough knowledge to share all of these. I've given a few examples in the next 2 slides, basically, or 3 slides. Number one is in the field of heart failure. Heart failure is a disease that's been known for many years. We are still learning more and more about it in different ways. And at Boston Scientific, we have many different solutions for heart failure from the interventional cardiology side, from the structural heart side, and from the cardiac rhythm management side. What I'm sharing here on the slide, if you like, is some products that we have in the area of stimulation of the heart in order to improve the cardiac rhythm. Without getting into too much detail, the nature of the products we've been offering and the advantage of one generation over another has led to effectively the reduction of the size in one way. Sometimes it's actually giving a pulse, sometimes it's just measuring like a pacemaker, but at the same time, the information that we're gathering and the message that we can give back to the physician and or to the patient, and sometimes to the hospital in order to be able to do population analysis as well, has grown with time as Bluetooth, as communication technology, as charging technology, and as our understanding of disease has improved in the past few years and will continue to do so. I just want to focus for a moment on what you have here on the bottom right. It's one of our latest products that have come on with FDA just a few months ago, actually. It's called LuxDX, or the Insertable Cardiac Monitor, ICM, which is basically a small, I would say, again, if we're back to fingernails, fingernail size injection placed under the skin, not in the heart, not even close to the heart, but in the chest under the skin, in order to do a variety of different monitoring activities, primarily for the field of cardiac rhythm and electrophysiology, but with other potential as well. And we are using that as a platform in order to think about many other things you could do in terms of data collection, sharing, communication, warning, early warning signals of many different areas. And that's something which we couldn't have thought of if we were the best medical company in the world, but the technology and the data revolution hadn't advanced the way they have in the past decade or so. And it's really changed the way you can look at the concept of a wearable to start being an implantable, where the majority of the brain inside the product is actually not the sensor, which of course is very smart. But then on top of that, you've got the communication, you've got the cybersecurity, you've got the materials which allow you to have a biocompatibility in the body for many years, and the ability to have something in the body, even if you're not a very sick patient, you could still benefit from products like this as we move forward. So that's an example, again, of how technology, data, and of course, medical capabilities and technologies and needs come out of meaningful innovation in the world of heart failure. The second example happens to be actually a little bit in a similar area of heart failure, actually in this particular case, electrophysiology, but in a nearby area of cardiac rhythm management as well, but a very different angle of how technology has had such a major role to play. And I think you'll see more of this in some of the talks later today. And that is the world of telehealth. While we've actually been pushing this for a while, COVID has, in a strange way, been very helpful in this regard, in terms of the fact that you might be aware of the fact that 70% of many doctors' visits have turned out to be virtual during the COVID pandemic at particular periods of time inside the lockdown, etc. And it appears as though this is not going to be a temporary effect. It may go down a little bit. Everybody wants to see their doctor once in a while, but sometimes you want to see the doctor virtually rather than in person. And we're seeing that trend likely to continue in some way. We have an augmented reality platform to actually help our doctors, and as a result of that, our patients as well, to advise them on how best to perform a procedure in a perioperative way as well. And we actually started this process as an internal award that we awarded a certain innovation grant internally at Boston Scientific. And we started to develop this as a virtual tool. And actually, it turns out that perhaps unsurprisingly, but 4 times more procedures were used in April 2020 than beforehand. And that's as a result of the fact that, again, the technology had improved, the barrier had been lowered, the quality of the product was already good enough to be used and to actually have immense value in an environment which required a telehealth solution. And from now moving forward, even if the requirement is hopefully reduced a little bit, the availability of a technology like this is only going to be enhanced as time goes on. So we basically had a system where we are allowing the physician on call who is actually performing a procedure to be able to be working with Boston Scientific staff to explain more and more about the tool while they actually are implanting the system in case they have any queries. And that can help us, of course, not having clinical staff supporting the program in person in case that's impossible or undesired, and things can move on from there. As mentioned before, and this is actually public knowledge, we actually were involved with a particular process whereby there was a USNS Mercy, particular hospital ship belonging to the Army, being used during COVID that needed to use our system for a particular implant. And the first time, I believe it was done in the Navy, was done with a Boston Scientific remote system. And we're very proud of that. But again, this is the direction things were going to go in anyway, because of the confluence, if you like, of data technology and medical technology. And we were proud to be part of this. And it's just, again, just beginning right now. And the last thing I think I want to focus on, because we really need to understand how important that is in the world of the clinic, is not only to have an improved device, it's not only being able to advise on our device using amazing technology of communication such as Ask Angie, but it's also the ability, which we're still working on and is probably the most immature of the 3 examples I'm giving, to start improving the way the world is able to absorb and understand the world of clinical data and big data. And with that in mind, we at Boston are doing a lot of work to try and make meaningful understanding of what's going on in the world of data, and to try and allow that to, again, allow us to do more population density on one side, understanding what tools should be best, warning patients that they need to start moving to a slightly different process if necessary, help with understanding at the mega level what is a patient journey for various diseases and see how that can help, and learn from thousands of patients at a time how a new patient who is similar to a certain cohort ought to be treated. So this is something which is only beginning to happen now. The data is going to be improving, but again, when you're merging better technology with a world full of technology and communication, with a world where the data is getting better and better with time, and the transmittance of the data and the speed of analyzing that data is improving, we're going into a very special world. So it's really just a taster there for the confluence and the perfect storm that we're expecting to see, and we're actually in the middle of it right now. And I think we'll be seeing the storm leading to many good products in the coming years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Excellent presentation. And I appreciate, as always, all of your activities in terms of outreach to the startup community across Europe and Israel as well. So thank you for the presentation, and thank you in the larger sense for all you're doing to help entrepreneurs. We talked about populations, addressing population health issues through bioelectronics, through devices. Yaron is going to talk about a population of one, and something that happened that spurred an amazing innovation and story. So Avi, the floor is yours, please.
Hey, thanks, and thank you, and thanks Shmuel for allowing me to talk. And I hope it's more than n equals 1. Okay, so I'm Avi Yaron. I'm from Israel, and I would love to share with you my personal story, so you could decide whether brain tumors are a curse or a blessing. It's 1993. I'm 26 years old. I'm in the hospital, sitting in front of the neurosurgeon to hear him tell me, Avi, you have a brain tumor. It may be cancerous. You must be operated as soon as possible. Till that moment, I was a healthy and successful, intensively working and studying, high on life, proud that I didn't waste too much time on sleep, blessed with a Midas touch. Whatever I touched turned to gold. And here I am, sitting in front of the neurosurgeon, and he tells me the tumor is at a nasty location. I can remove it, and you will probably stay alive, but most probably dysfunctional cognitively, handicapped physically, and with epilepsy. Just imagine yourself at this situation. I'm shocked. I can't even hear his words. I can't really understand. Now, we are entrained to say, yes, doctor, and obey their authority. But why? I follow my instincts. I refuse the surgery. And unsure whether it was great intuition or pure denial, but this decision saved my life. I see 2 other neurosurgeons. The first suggests a follow-up MRI in 3 months, and the second, the biopsy. Now, what do you do now? See another one? I can't accept the fact that I lost a bright future that I was working so hard to reach. But after feeling sorry for myself, I remember a wise saying, when you have no options, you have infinite options. I decided to fight for my life. I spent months in the medical library learning anatomy, biology, neurosurgery, searching for someone or something that could save my life. Now, everyone around me, including my parents and close friends, think I've lost it, that I'm completely irresponsible, and I'm all alone in this fight. I'm so desperate that I embrace any available alternative medicine that has the slightest potential to save me. When I don't understand and can't explain scientifically, I just follow my curiosity and imagination to take control. I simultaneously practice Chinese acupuncture and herbs, biofeedback, craniosacral, microbiotics, bioergonomy, NAT, hypnosis, megadoses of vitamins, garlic, and many, many more. In this process, I learned how much I disregarded my body, basically behaved like a ruthless boss. I understand that I'm addicted to stress, to not sleeping, And although I manage well under stress, my body doesn't like it. My stressful lifestyle suppresses my immune system, which may have led to the inability to fight off the mutation or tumor. A small proof was the fact that sometimes I caught a cold after skipping too much sleep. My immune system isn't immune to such behaviors. Mindful of this new knowledge, I decided to give my body the respect it deserves. I force myself to sleep 4 hours every night, although still I think it's a waste of time. Identify my stressing factors to better manage, improve my nutrition, revise my breath to belly breathing, and even reduce my beloved 10 cups of coffee to just 2. Can you imagine? Every 3 months, I have a follow-up MRI. No doubt that the tumor would shrink, and every time it only laughs at me. It grows even bigger. I crash from disappointment, but can't give up. I pick up the pieces and continue fighting, having a strong belief that eventually I will win. The story repeats itself, hope, disappointment, every 3 months. Meanwhile, the bomb in my head continues ticking. After 18 months, I realize that I have no other choice but to go for surgery, as the tumor is seriously pushing my left lobe, creating hydrocephalus and high intracranial pressure, endangering my life. I fly to New York to be operated with an advanced 2-day technique to remove these seeded lesions. My unique surgery is shown on CNN worldwide. After 6 months of various complications, I fully recuperate, have no symptoms. I return to Israel. It's a huge victory. I celebrate the date of the surgery as my 2nd birthday. Gradually, I start to regain and enjoy life again. I even meet the love of my life. And then, after 18 months, it all comes to an end. After another periodic MRI, I learn that I still have a residual tumor. I feel so defeated, but at least I know that my surgeon can remove it. I fly back to New York to hear him tell me, Avi, I don't have the technology to fully remove such a deep tumor. I need a miniature stereoscopic 3D camera. Your tumor is benign. It will grow slow. You can probably wait a few years. If you're lucky, someone will invent it. Now, he assumes he's kind to me, but I understand that I'm doomed to be a zipperhead, right? Open, closed, every few years till someone invents this camera. And what happens if no one does? I feel I have no hope. The frustration that a small tumor is controlling my life and that even the best surgeon can't remove it is just unbearable. This is my real wake-up call. I do my best to remind myself that being taken out of our comfort zone allows personal development and growth, enhancing the dynamic range of our mental flexibility. But it's extremely tough when you know you're going to die and have no hope. I research and try to understand why developments of excellent companies failed. I learn about stereoscopic perception and the brain visual system. After 2 years, I guesstimate that the barrier relates to the dual optomechanical channel approach and invent a completely different solution to bypass it. It's based on a single miniature silicon chip, multiplexing the right and left visions under the diffraction limit, perhaps like a combination of mammal and insect vision mechanisms. I quit my job, move to a garage, file patents, seek funding. Investors question me. You have a ticking bomb in your head that even the best neurosurgeon can't remove, and you want us to invest in you? I burn through my savings, undergo 3 more surgeries in Germany and Israel to get rid of the tumor, suffer immense complications, excruciating pain and fever. During these months, I almost give up, but eventually I fight my way back to full recuperation and manage to raise the money. Over the next 9 years, My team manages through various multidiscipline challenges, and in 2008, the system is launched and delivers the promise. 10 years later, the company gets acquired by Medtronic. Nowadays, I'm cured, almost against all odds, invented the impossible, and Vision Sense is saving lives on a daily basis. You think I should be very satisfied, but I'm not. Although I dedicated more than 15 years of my life to develop this advanced surgical technology, and although Western medicine saved me, I understand that these are not enough, that there is a missing link with Western medicine, the emotional component. During all these years, I supported hundreds of patients. Many of them redeveloped tumors, just like me. Frustratingly, my amazing technology doesn't cure them. Most were stressing themselves out regularly. Over and over again, I see that the ones that revise their life to reduce stress via healthy means do better. I notice how significant the emotional state is on their long-term survivability and quality of life. Now, if we think of it, technology has shrunk distances and times. In the past, we had ample dead time, doing nothing, a kind of meditation, enhancing parasympathetic activity. But nowadays, we keep ourselves busy with various electronics, boosting life intensity and sympathetic activity. Never a dull moment, right? And we're accumulating stress. Now, we use various fast, relaxing solutions, such as smoking, drinking alcohol, or emotional eating to feel better. But such solutions may tax our resilience and health in the long term. We don't allow our body healthy emotional distressors like practicing sports, hiking, meditation, proper sleep, as all these take too much time. And if you look at it, Western medicine is phenomenal in fixing acute health issues, but less so in curing chronic diseases. And typically it eliminates the symptom, but it doesn't deal with the root cause, nor cure the disease. Now, I know there are many causes to developing diseases, and I know it's very complex. However, I've come to the realization that the root cause of most diseases are chronic emotional states. And more than that, the disease is our friend, not our enemy. Our body is just trying to tell us something, using its language, that something is wrong with our life. And if we don't listen, it will raise its voice, developing a more serious disease until we do, hopefully not too late. I can't stop asking myself, what would have happened if doctors could have measured my emotions and stress levels, warning me ahead of time that I'm at a high risk to develop a disease? Thinking of it, not checking and measuring the emotional state is like a mechanic not checking your vehicle's oil level. Just imagine that you take your car for an annual checkup and the mechanic not warning you that there isn't enough oil in the engine. Would you accept that? Nowadays, most of us will live till 100, probably more. And unfortunately, the majority will be chronically ill. I can't sit back. I would like to provide the low oil level alarm to support the development of technologies that would allow us to listen carefully and understand the whispers of our body. My dream is to support the development of quantum leap solutions that would continuously, not periodically, monitor chronic emotional factors and provide us and physicians quantifiable scientific objective measures that they could trust and use while diagnosing, treating, and monitoring their patients. These will allow an early wake-up call to address a potential disease before becoming acute or chronic, just like blood sugar is measured for diabetes or high blood pressure for cardiac diseases today. I consider this as the future of medicine: personalized, predictive, proactive, and preventative, the famous 4 Ps. Now, there is another serious barrier for disruptive health tech: the dissonance between the long cycles of market adoption, typically conservative, versus the accelerating technology with short cycles. Advanced technologies will mature and outdate significantly before reaching regulatory approvals and broad physician acceptance. And the company will need to develop newer generations with extra years and funding to accomplish. Obviously, it's a setback for serious funding and for VCs to invest. I know it's extremely complicated, but I prefer dedicating my life to big dreams and perhaps failing, but I will try. This is my next mission, and I can't do it on my own. My partner and I set a new $50 million long-term fund called HealthYA Ventures Lab to team up and support such disruptive quantum solutions. I'm here to serve. Would love and appreciate if you're interested to join me in this amazing journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Avi. That was excellent. Avi, you can find him if you look for his TED Talk. It's even more in depth, but amazing what you're doing with HealthYA Venture Labs. I would like to transition now from sort of the entrepreneurial perspective to the pharma perspective. So Jeremy Sohn, the floor is yours. He's going to talk about a new era for life sciences, reimagining medicine with data and digital. Hi, Jeremy in Boston.
Hi, everyone. Just getting ready to share my screen here, so give me 10 seconds. We're going into presentation mode, maybe? There we go. Fabulous. So pleasure to meet everyone. Just amazing stories. Next time I'm going to make sure that Levy tells me not to speak after Avi, because that was truly inspirational, and I'm speechless actually. But I'm glad you're better, because I wish I looked that good and went through what you did. So so I'm Jeremy Sohn. I'm Global Head of Digital Business Development. Today, I'd like to talk to you about Novartis's journey over the last 3 years, reimagining medicine. And this is a story that traverses 130 different countries, 120,000 associates, and thousands of partners, companies and individuals like yourself. And what I'd like you to think about and action during the speech and after this presentation is to think about what is your role, or what role can you take, not just to help accelerate Pharma or Novartis, but actually your own companies, your own academic institutions. What role can you play to help reimagine medicine as well? Novartis, as you may be aware, we are one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world today, but we didn't start out as a pharmaceutical company. We started out 250 years ago in the middle of the 1800s as a chemical company, not unlike most pharmaceutical companies. And we evolved from chemicals and dyes to pharmaceuticals because the chemistry was the same. Over the last 250 years, we have developed as an industry, Novartis in particular as well, have developed some of the most groundbreaking drugs to cure diseases that we never thought were curable before. But one of the things that we've realized is that we cannot just pat ourselves on the back and be proud, or be, as Avi, I think, and others have just suggested, is we can't say, hey, look at what we've done. We need to continue to challenge ourselves to reach further, to go beyond, to think beyond the normal constructs of disease, of medicine, and to ask ourselves, what does the next generation of pharmaceutical companies look like? How can we become a leading pharmaceutical company that now leverages not just the power of science, but also the power of technology and data? And you've heard some great examples earlier from Dr. Tracey, as well as from Dr. Goldstein as well. So what does that mean for Novartis? 3 years ago, when our new CEO came into his role, he made it clear, and this is groundbreaking. It may or may not sound groundbreaking to you, but in the industry, this is really groundbreaking. He said, we're not just a leading research and science-based company. We need to be a leading science company empowered and driven by data and technology. So in fact, we're actually at 3 pillars, and they are reinforcing each other. Now, when you look at, but what does that mean? What does that mean for Novartis? Well, we spend about $10 billion, $9 billion in R&D. We have 6,000 researchers and 250 data scientists inside our research organization that we call NIBR, or NIBR, depending on if you say potato or potato. The future of pharma will likely actually evolve between there being 6,000 researchers and 250 data scientists to probably being 3,000 researchers and 3,000 data scientists. Or maybe actually researchers are data scientists and data scientists are researchers. Why do we actually sort of separate the two? Because the future, again, in order for us to continue to lead to transformative drugs, to disease-modifying drugs, we need to think beyond just the science. We need to leverage technology and data to create those new drugs, those new innovations. And so what are we doing? How are we doing that today? Well, we're doing that in many different ways. In cancer, this is an image of an MRI. Just imagine, or a stain. Just imagine what we could do when we use technology to actually look deeper beyond the visual ability for scientists and physicians to be able to diagnose disease, but to actually leverage data, the rich data that exists in the pixelation of these images to actually identify new biomarkers, to be able to diagnose individuals earlier, to be able to understand the progression of disease even better, to be able to understand in MS, for example, which is one of our therapeutic areas we spend a lot of time in, to be able to predict and understand what does MS progression look like in all the MRIs that we're collecting. We actually don't know, right? We see lesions, sometimes those lesions are correlated to physical changes, sometimes they're not, to mental changes, et cetera. But are there things that exist? Are there nuances that exist beyond the visual representation inside the pixelation that could give us nuance and information? We know in cancer that thankfully, with the progress that we've made with many drugs, if only we were able to identify and diagnose cancer earlier, before it progressed to stage 2 and stage 3 and stage 4, that we can, in many cases, treat cancer successfully. But because we haven't been able to find those biomarkers today, we haven't been able to do so effectively. And so imagine now what we could do if we were actually using data and technology and AI algorithms, machine learning techniques to be able to do that. In research, it's not just about using image-based technology to understand better biomarkers, digital or otherwise. What about being able to solve some of the biggest problems? In the drug discovery process, many of you may be aware, but on an annual basis, we may start with 10,000 potential drug targets. And over the course of that annual period, we whittle it down to hopefully get to 1, 2, maybe 3 potential candidates that we want to bring forward. And why is that? That's oftentimes because we actually, we're solving for so many different challenges: permeability, potency, adverse event profiles that we're trying to avoid, on-target connectivity, and the list goes on and on. Undruggable targets is one of the biggest issues that we have, particularly with large molecule drugs. What if we could use not just machine learning, but quantum computing? Because you can imagine, with the larger the protein, the larger the potential monoclonal antibody, as an example, that you have, the more almost infinite number of mutations that you can make, changes in that protein, in that molecule that you can make to potentially adjust for, again, permeability, solubility, potency, et cetera. And so we're using quantum computing. Peptone is the name of a company that we're just beginning to collaborate with to evaluate, can we actually solve undruggable targets. In the future, maybe that myriad of potential, that infinite number of potential candidates can actually be driven down with precision, with high probability down to that same 3, but where we know that that 3 will actually make it, hopefully, to regulatory approval. As a pharma company, we've always been a data company. So when I stand here today and talk to you about, we're not just a science company, well, we've always been a data company. Of course, we're a data company. Isn't that what clinical trials is about? We run nearly or sponsor nearly 500 clinical trials on an annual basis at any given point in time. We sit on 250 years, really, actually, in a digital form, 30 plus years of clinical data. And yet, historically, most pharma companies have not actually leveraged that data in meaningful ways. It doesn't mean that we didn't use it for the clinical trial purposes and then ultimately regulatory purposes. It means that that data existed in silos in most cases. One trial existed on, over here, and another trial over here, and another trial over here, and no one brought them together. We, like many, are bringing these 2 million patient years of clinical data and bringing them into one, not just a data lake, but into an analytic framework that allows us to analyze data, to be able to find those potential biomarkers, to be able to understand endotypes, to see subtype patient populations. If you want to understand, we have a drug called Aimovig, for example, in migraine, where we see actually a percentage of patients that have a complete response. These are patients who suffer from migraines more than 4 times a month, completely debilitating their lives. We're able to cure those patients. But the sad reality is we don't know at a molecular level or a clinical level or a phenotypic level who those patients are. It's completely random from our perspective. We know they'll be there statistically, but what if we could actually identify who those will be and help bring this drug in a more targeted way? That's what we hope to be able to do by bringing this data together. And what we hope in doing so is that we create what we've called internally the map of life. Right? It may sound aspirational, but it's actually real. It's beginning to happen. And we know that actually, as we bring all this data together and we continue to organize it and we add new data sets, molecular data sets, genomic data sets, proteomic data sets, molecular data sets, image-based data sets, we will increasingly be able to discover those nuances of disease progression and drug response, be able to continue to make those groundbreaking and disease-modifying drugs. Equally important, we're leveraging this data in yet another way. It's not just about improving the drug discovery targets or improving the probability of selection of drug discovery targets or drug design. What if we could use this data for in silico drug development? What does that mean? That means actually, can we not just create synthetic control arms? What if we actually use causal learning models to actually predict the interventional arms, the results of the interventional arms? Could we actually improve again that just drug discovery pipeline? So instead of 1 out of every 10,000, maybe actually, 100 out of every 10,000 could be successful. Maybe we could shorten that 12 to 15 year cycle down to 5 years or 7 years. 30 years ago, it used to be 5 and 7 years, right? We need to get back to those timelines. And if we could do that, again, now we could bring to market so many more, hopefully, groundbreaking drugs to each and every one of you. We use data not just on our drug discovery process, but also to manage our clinical trial process. Again, it may be surprising to you, we're a data company at heart, but we actually had these 500 clinical trials all in flight like airplanes, and yet we had no control tower. We didn't know which trials, other than on a spreadsheet, were potentially finishing, which were running behind, which actually were struggling to recruit, where we needed to potentially intervene because we were seeing a problem, maybe in the design and the feasibility of that study. Today, we brought all of that together into a single control center. It's a beautiful place in our Basel campus where literally, we can see everything that's going on. We can predict where there's going to be challenges. We could use it to design better implementation and better designs of our studies. And what we hope to do there, again, is drive a significant acceleration in our ability to be able to execute trials. Let me take a pause for a second, because I said in the beginning of my presentation that I wanted each and every one of you to think about, what role do you have? Where are you in your own journey within your company, within your ability to influence the industry? Let me tell you for a second about my journey. That system that you just saw was very much part of my journey. I was an entrepreneur, hopefully like many of you that I'm speaking with. Okay, I had started a company, actually a few companies in this space to optimize clinical trials. And I said to myself, if you really want to have an impact on the industry, you need to go inside the beast. You need to go inside the pharma company and help them innovate and help them drive the change that you hope and believe you could see in the industry. And that's what helped. And in fact, part of the technology and the company that I started drives that nerve live, that control tower that I just showed you. And so I want to bring you back again to think about, what role can you play? Let me go back and continue this story. All of this data requires a change of culture, a change of technology, a change in the way that we operate as a business. It's not easy. I'm not going to pretend, right? It took convincing people that we need to move from in-house data centers to cloud-based data centers. It took us to figure out, how do we have a multi-cloud environment? Which cloud environments? What analytics systems? How do we even deal with this myriad of data? We've never taken in image data. We usually kept it with our academic research and our site institution. All of that took change, but it's change that our teams have embraced. And it's, by the way, it's change that is driven by a world-class team of experts, many of which, as I said before, existed within the company, but many of which we needed to go and hire. And we reach out to individuals like yourselves and partners like yourselves, whether you're academic or whether you're a large company or a startup company, and we say, reach out to us. Come help us. Hopefully make the change, the move that I made, and come and be part of us. So again, what we can then do is not just build scalable solutions, but hopefully reimagine medicine with technology, data, and the best of science. And so thank you for letting me share the story of Novartis. I hope you are already thinking about what your role is in the future of medicine. Thank you. Thank you, Levy.
Thank you, Jeremy. You gave me a lot to think about. I wasn't expecting I was going to have to actually think. Anyway, terrific presentation, excellent. We have one final presentation. I apologize to Dr. John Whyte. We're starting a bit later than planned. But I don't think there's anyone who's better equipped to address the theme of how AI will impact the healthcare system. Dr. Whyte is not only a practicing physician, he's ex-FDA, ex-CDC, the chief medical officer of WebMD, and has therefore a very keen understanding both of the patient as well as the broader system. So I think we're in for a treat. Dr. Whyte, the floor is yours. John, can you hear me? You might be on mute. So we'll wait while that's being unmuted. I also want to thank all of our presenters, Jonathan Goldstein, Yaron, Jeremy Sohn from Novartis. Very grateful for your insights. So John, are you able to unmute yourself? We can see your video. There we are. No, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Is your microphone on? Yeah. Okay. Oh, you're on. Let's do this. Ask to unmute.
How about now?
Perfect. Excellent.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Thank
Just
you.
had to turn it off a few times. Thanks for inviting me. Those really were some terrific presentations. And Avi, particularly, I loved your story and I love how you had 10 cups of coffee a day. I thought I had a lot, but now I know I don't. So I'm going to go quickly, just on the interest of time, and really try to give some insights and perspectives about the role of AI, because everyone's always excited about AI. It is what I call this unstoppable force. But a lot of people have tried to make changes to the healthcare system over the past few decades, and it is hard to do. And when you think about it, when we talk about AI, it's always kind of the latest technologies, right? It's the cool, the glitz. A Pentagon has a laser that can identify people, by their heartbeat. And that's really what we were excited about, pre-COVID. But COVID really has changed everything in terms of how we deliver care and how we think about technology. And in the post-COVID world, we have to recognize what the culture is going to look like. So I can show you this eye, and I can ask you whether this is a female eye or a male eye. And if I ask a group of ophthalmologists, 50% will get it right. But I can use AI and machine learning that can detect 99% of the time accurately, whether it's a male eye or a female eye. And I'll tell you, it's a female eye. But the point that I want to make is, does it matter in terms of how we use artificial intelligence in healthcare? And so often we get caught up with the glitz. But what consumers really want, especially in a post-COVID world, is they want connectivity. They want convenience. Why should I have to wait 4 months for a dermatology appointment if I can do it right now after I searched online and am concerned about melanoma? I want to have control in terms of my data, in terms of all the information from wearables. And in the United States, where there's more and more high deductible plans, how am I going to save some money? So when we think about AI, we need to be much more practical. And a great app would be a smartphone app that can help diagnose ear infections more accurately and at home. For those of us who have young children, we know how hard it is then to have to take time off to go to the doctor's appointment. So could I use an app? Could I actually use algorithms to look for a certain type of hypocholesterolemia and scour databases to make sure I don't miss it, to put those people on the right drug therapy? When we think about population health, right? We can do issues relating to, I mentioned about, all the wearables, but it's also in terms of COVID. I can look at oxygenation from home. I can look at breathing rates and temperatures. I can do contact tracing. And in the United States, several apps have been launched to do contact tracing, but there's been resistance from the public in terms of issues with privacy and how is that going to relate. So I showed you that laser at the beginning, how that's exciting, but what would really make a difference? A toilet that can analyze our urine, analyze our stool, right? Avi, you talked about prevention, how we don't focus on chronic disease. That can be the ultimate source of prevention. But people aren't excited enough about it right now. And I think that's going to change when we have limited resources. And when we talk about the role of AI, where it has often failed, and this is the immovable aspect of where does it fit into the healthcare system, particularly in terms of process and the delivery of care. So when you say AI to some of my physician colleagues, and I still see patients, sometimes we think EHR. You said EHR was going to make my life easier. Now you're saying AI is going to make my life easier. Some days it's just making it harder. And they're tired of hearing that the AI doctor is going to see you now, that the future doctor is not going to be human. It's the rise of AI in medicine. And I love this slide because this talks about the post-physician era and the demise of the physician and the myth of physician necessity. And this was written in 1976. So for a long time, people have been saying, physicians are going to the wayside. But if you want AI to succeed, and too many technology companies don't focus on this, you have to think about workflow and how it fits within the physician and nurse and pharmacist workforce and how they might adopt the technology. Because there are tremendous promises in terms of AI. When you think about diagnostic accuracy, particularly in imaging, because they can see their patterns, perhaps on mammograms and CT scans, more than our eye can. You know, what's the predictive power? If I look at this lesion, that it's going to be, you know, a basal cell carcinoma. The role of precision medicine, real world evidence, which is still in its infancy. And if you talk to Janet Woodcock, the Center Director for Drugs at FDA, we've got a long way to go. But how is AI going to help with that? How does it relate to patient satisfaction? And am I going to have a good experience? You know, in the post-COVID world, we're seeing it now, but it's going to be even higher. 60% of consumers have used apps for health. And here's the good news. 90% have had a positive experience. And then it relates again to the clinical adoption. How's the medical community going to adopt this? And too often, again, we're focusing on what's cool and what's glitzy. But the pitfalls of it is when we're talking about rare diseases where numbers are small, where often we have the greatest need of technology and innovation, we often don't see AI there. You know, in terms of data quality, some companies do a great job, others not so much. And we really need to move everyone to a better point. You know, black box type of approach in terms of how the technology works isn't going to, you know, be something that's acceptable to most people. You know, and sometimes we say that, you know, AI is trying to find a problem that's really not a problem. And we need to more appropriately match the diagnostic algorithm or the treatment algorithm of AI to the problem. And it's all about outcomes, right? How do I know that if, you know, I create a system of wearables and sensors, that's going to change outcomes? And that's been a challenge for some AI tools. They're not focused on the outcomes. So how is, you know, the Apple Watch in terms of detection of AFib, does that improve outcomes? There's been a lot of talk about a lot of, you know, unnecessary need to go to the doctor. So how are we going to manage that? You know, I talked a lot about workflow, and then we have to recognize the issue of a post-COVID world of the cost. There's going to be limited resources to invest. So how is that going to play out? So, you know, what's the future? And I purposely had this one that said it's loading because we really don't know what it's going to be. But the future of AI and how it's really going to change the healthcare system is some of those points that I mentioned. How do we improve clinical outcome? How do we incorporate those studies in the development of AI tools that show that we have a better outcome if we use these technologies rather than they're just, you know, interesting? We have to enhance the consumer experience, and more we're seeing it moving from a provider marketplace to a consumer marketplace. I want to do everything in my home. I can do cancer chemotherapy in my home now. There's so much more. You're bringing care to the patient, and digital tools are playing a big role. How do we spur innovation that we're just not, you know, the next version, but the next 2, 3, 4 versions? You know, we kind of have the idea that AI definitely increases efficiency, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just minimal efficiency. And early on, when we adopt new technologies, we often see that providers and physicians are reluctant to use it. They still kind of use what they know, and sometimes it increases cost because it's not increasing efficiency yet. And then really it's about how do we integrate it into the workflow? And I think that's been one of the biggest challenges. And sometimes it's the process that developers have their own world that they're creating innovation, and then you try to think, well, I'll just bring it to the clinical world, the health world, and it will be adopted. And that's sometimes where it goes to die, because they have not integrated it into the clinical workflow and had adoption of the clinical community, because expectations can be different on the part of consumers versus the part of providers. I included my contact information. I know we're a little short on time. I want to be respectful of people's time. I'm always happy to engage. I thought there was great presentations, and you know, I look forward to engaging with the panelists, you know, at a future time as well. So thanks for the opportunity.
So thank you to Dr. Whyte. Follow him on Twitter. He last week was named one of the 50 top health influencers, along with a guy named Fauci. I'm not sure what that guy does, but must be a good thing.
He's a little higher than I was.
So thank you to Dr. Tracey, to Jeremy Sohn, to Jonathan Goldstein, to Avi Yaron, to Dr. Whyte, to all of you who have stayed, to Shmuel Einav, who is the chair of the conference. And let's hope for healthier and happier. Thanks so much.
Thank you.